Good morning. Got a few announcements. Track 1, there's a talk on technical hacking by Chris Berberick. Track 2, down in Auditorium 2, there's Ryan Irving, Ways to Identify Malware on a System. And then after this talk, if you go down to auditoriums, there's a lunch they'll hand out, and then if you can just go around, there's some benches outside or anywhere else you can find to have a seat and have lunch. And then we'll start the talks back up at 1:30. There'll be a vendor-induced security issues by David Chronister, I guess in the main auditorium. And next talk is by Guy Hagen, and he's going to talk to us about mitigating brand damage from a cyber attack. Thanks, Guy.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming in. I know we're kind of in between a good bunch of sessions and the nice window for about a half an hour before we start thinking about lunch and get distracted from anything useful, so I'll respect that. Tucker Hall is one of the Southeast's top crisis agencies. We get brought in for all types of crises that happen to organizations and companies at all levels, whether it's an explosion, whether one of your board members committed a heinous crime, whether you're in a lawsuit, or whether or not your brand has ended up in a cybersecurity attack and you're very concerned about what that's going to do to your reputation and your customers. My role at Tucker Hall is I'm a partner and vice president, and I lead all of our research and technology strategy practices. So that means while I don't usually roll up my sleeves and get in and actually do any of the forensics and any of the deep level technical stuff, I work at all levels, everything from the media to the board to the executives to helping develop strategy, and then working with the tech team as well, the information assurance team, so that everybody is talking on the same page and working together. So that I bring sort of a unique perspective to this sort of situation. And what I'm going to talk to you today is about all the parts of an incident, an intrusion incident, past the technical side, all the things that actually cause damage beyond the software, beyond the hardware, beyond all the defense systems, and how we get out of that. So I'm going to start off by this fine picture here. This is the picture of a 22-year-old Philippine hacker from year 2000. Everybody remembers the I love you worm from way back, even if it might be a little bit older than some of us here. That's still held to be one of the most damaging hacking incidents in history because it affected over 45 million Windows-based computers, caused more than $15 billion in damages worldwide. It's still considered one of the most harmful disasters that ever happened, but I think it's also particularly important because it set an image in our mind of what it means when we say hacker. If you talk to most people and say, who hacks? Who does the hacking? Who's the bad guy out there? This is the picture we all have, and certainly this is the picture that Hollywood has, right? The lone iconoclast sociopath working in their mom's basement, kind of low on resources, but really, really full of lots of anger and hatred and creativity, and they're going out there, they're going to take on the world as just the lone gunman. And this is the image that everybody really has. And I'll tell you, working with a lot of CEOs, working with top people in financial sector, working with top people in education, this is what they think they're up against. And they look at their departments and they say, we got all these people, all this talent, we have nothing to worry about. I'm sure a lot of you have encountered a lot of this. Of course, I'm not totally discounting that guy or that gal. We know that there's a very large rise in ransomware, and you can buy a CryptoLocker and other ransomware packages off the black market very inexpensively, and they're going after your mom and dad. They're going after very small businesses, because even restaurants, even car washes are now starting to collect databases full of records that can be held for ransom. So these guys aren't going to be, to be discounted, but they're not the enemy. What I like to tell my clients is your enemy sort of looks more like this. If those of you are saying, wow, that looks a little bit like NORAD or the military, well, yes, this is the Navy cyber war room in action, or actually it's a small portion of it. And that's just to kind of give you a sense of one of our branches of the military, how sophisticated they are for dealing with large-scale cyber activity out there. Well, I give this example because we don't really have pictures of what the Chinese cyber organizations look like. We don't really have any really great pictures of what the Soviet cyber gangs look like, but we do know that they now have office parks. They have office buildings. They have entire supply chains. It's $1.5 billion industry over there where they're now recruiting the best and brightest out of college, and they're offering them health care and benefits coming out for a whole career. So they are sophisticated. They are a whole industry now. And they are what each company is up against when they're facing an intrusion or they're facing hacking events. So I love this picture for multiple levels because, first of all, Russian bears and everything. But I love this because when I talk about hacking to these senior people in the banking, in the medical, in the education industries, the first answer I get is, oh, we're not in any danger. We've got a great team, we've got a couple of vendors, and they tell me they're on top of the game and we're not hacked, we're okay. And of course, all of you know there's really only two types of organizations. The types of organizations that have been hacked and the types of organizations that tell themselves they haven't been hacked, right? And the reason, part of this is a lot of companies are hanging on to that fortress mentality where they felt it was safe to fight that one lone hacker out there. Part of the reason is just when it comes to resourcing. Even large banks only have a few people inside that are their information assurance department, and those people are responsible not only for all of the systems and software and hardware, but they're responsible for the behavior of every staff member in that entire company, right? Behavioral engineering. They're responsible for the behavior of the executives. That's even harder when you've got all the CEO and the top management demanding to have their own devices and things differently special for them at home. They are responsible for what all of the vendors do. So, and not only that, you're looking across almost every industry that's out there, and they are still using legacy software and protection systems. They are slow to implement patches. We know that from I'm going to use the Target example a lot today because that's what I kind of built my deck around. But we still know that there's numerous high-profile intrusion incidents and data theft incidents that are still using the same vulnerabilities that were exploited in that Target attack. People are very slow to respond to them. So this situation is over and over what we see happening with our clients. We thought we were prepared, and then suddenly we realized it was an unfair fight that we were in, and we were just totally bulldozed. So now I'm going to kind of describe a typical situation that which we've seen. I'm sure a lot of you are very sophisticated and have done a lot of consulting, or you worked in a lot of intrusion incidents yourself, and you know what different types of incidents might look like, how they may go down. But here is what I kind of put out as a semi-typical scenario at a high level where we are called in for major brand damage that really typifies how unfair the battle is when it comes to the companies today. So imagine a situation for a financial institution or a medical institution. They're constantly subject to phishing attacks. Well, one day, somebody opens the wrong email, they click the wrong email, and of course what went from a broad phishing attack, somebody back in the war room over in Russia observes that click-through happens, and it goes from just a broad kind of automated attack to calling over the supervisor, and the supervisor takes a look at who's responding to that and where they are in the organization. And they turn that phishing attack into a spear phishing attack. They pull in their research department that pulls up they buy black market credit and financial information on all of the management of the organization. They dedicate an entire department 24/7 to spear phishing and hacking email accounts and getting in a little bit deeper at multiple levels of the organization. Then what we have seen happening is that one initial successful phishing attempt is then leveraged to get deeper and deeper and higher up in the organization, not just with people who have more authority, transactional authority, more access to more of the data, but also more broadly across the organization so they can orchestrate. So it's one thing when you're saying, hey, everybody don't click on that email. It's another one when suddenly people are getting email from their HR department saying do this and don't do that. Email from their IT department saying, hey, so this weekend we're going to be, the system's going to be down, so don't mind what's happening. After spear phishing goes on for a little bit, we have seen eventually they nail somebody with significant authority. In case of some of our clients, it might have been a situation where they have transactional authority to move money on the order of millions. Well, after that, it's still not opportunistic. These people have a system. What happens is they orchestrate an attack. They set up a trap where they wait until it's going to be a holiday weekend. They wait until they know key people are going on vacation. They wait until they know the maximum damage can occur. They execute a transaction or they exfiltrate the information. Then they drop in more smoke screen, where they will send out emails saying, hey, like I said, the system's going to be down this weekend, don't worry about it. Or they will do a DDoS attack, where the whole network, the whole reconciliation network or the communications network is going to be down for a couple of days. And by the time anybody has figured out what has even happened, they thought they were fighting the denial of service attack, but what they're really trying to discover was the money is moved. Well, that money is moved, and it is moved, and is moved again. Or that data is already gone and is being used for something else. By the time that smoke is cleared, that organization, that cyber gang, is already on to their next victim, and that money is long gone. This is the type of situation that we're facing. And even if the organization or client was relatively sophisticated, the amount of resources that gets poured against a sizable opportunity just overwhelms the client. I apologize if this is not new to any of you. I mean, is anything I said surprising to any of you? Probably not in this room, but I've talked in front of financial, in front of medical, in front of educational, other organizations, and they're shocked to hear this information. So, now it's coming to the meat of the story. This is all situation up till now. What does the damage from an intrusion or a data exfiltration event come to? What is that damage? Well, what you see in the paper is only the tip of the iceberg. The part that's easily to measure and what we talk about in cybersecurity circles is only a small fraction of the damage that actually happens to organizations. And what we have seen with our clients is there's 4 different levels. There's the direct damage, secondary, customers, and the brand. So again, I'm going to use the Target situation over and over because it was one of the better studied ones. The direct damages that we see are the ones that all of you can measure. It is actual incident response costs. It is the remediation repair. For example, in Target, the $200 million that was cost to replace credit cards for all the different credit card companies is the cost to change some of the systems over inside Target to harden against future attacks. It is any actual money that gets moved if you're a financial transaction or if you are a different type of organization, different type of attack, the cost of the actual ransom data. This is the dollar figure that we see in the paper. And in fact, at the top here, we see a headline from the New York Times. Target puts costs at $148 million in forecast drop. Well, does anybody know where that $148 million came from? It was the max cap of the insurance that Target had. And all they could come up with is they knew that they were going to use all of it. And that's just the direct costs. Now we're looking at the secondary. Well, the damage isn't done just from the actual hacking. Now there's the fallout, the immediate fallout. Maybe the Department of Justice comes after you for not keeping proper records of, control over sensitive information, and you get a Department of Justice fine. You get regulations brought down. Or if you're medical, you get a HIPAA violation fine brought on top of you. So you get possibly hundreds of $millions in federal fines and punitive damage on you. You may have your stock plummet. Target's stock dropped in half in 1 quarter alone. That's almost immeasurable damage that happened to the company financially, independent to anything that happened from the actual event. And of course, lawsuits are still accruing from this. They're still trying to wrap their heads around how much damage is going to come to Target as a result of lawsuits. There's now a growing industry of trial lawyers specializing in class action lawsuits for major brands who got hacked. The moment one of your clients gets hacked, there are attorneys sizing you up to see how much they can get out of that client. Estimates are still growing and may top between $500 to $1.1 billion for Target, independent of all the other costs and figures that I put up there so far. And we're only on the second level. Here's the third level. Customers. Of course, when your favorite company has been hacked and it's affected your credit card and suddenly you're afraid of how your identity was treated, your trust got violated. And the reputation of the company fails and your behavior and interaction with that company fails. Target executives have admitted that how customers shopped immediately at Target changed. They went to cash, and a large percentage of them stopped shopping at Target, possibly temporarily, possibly permanently. So they suddenly had costs to staff differently. They had to change their business processes differently. They had to handle cash differently. They had to change their technology because fewer people were willing to trust running their credit card through Target or online for the purchases. Suddenly the whole company had to operate differently, and that's a major cost. And of course, what happens when you just lose those customers? Because they said, Target was incompetent. Target did not live up to my trust and their reputation. And in that last example, Target again said it affected their profits due to revenue dropped. And the number of sales dropped after that breach. Finally, we have the brand level. This is your reputation. The brand isn't your logo. The brand isn't your website. The brand isn't your tagline. The brand is what people say about you. It's the Amazon recommendation, right? When people say, hey, where do you shop? And why do you shop there? That is your brand. And suddenly after a major intrusion event, people say one more thing about your brand. I love Target. They have great buys. They're a little bit upscale. They're super convenient and clean. But by the way, you really can't trust them because you're going to lose your money through them. You're going to lose your identity. People might start saying that. There's going to be a caveat. So suddenly, you have to work hard to regain people's trust in the long term. So this reputation loss is particularly hard to measure, but it's going to take up to 10 years. And according to some research, Ponemon Institute is a particular cybersecurity research organization that looks at brand damage and some of these more softer impacts. And by their measurement of major brands who've been hacked, they're saying it's at least $330 million per incident for major brands for the reputation repair part. So now you add up all those things that I've mentioned, and you're looking at easily over $1 billion worth of costs that Target faced, maybe 1.5. 4 different layers of impacts that have to be considered when usually we only look at one. We only look at the actual damage. So I haven't seen all the other speakers today, but I've attended lots and lots of cybersecurity and information assurance presentations. I'm sure all of you have. And there's one thing I've observed. The first job of the presenter in one of these conferences is to scare the bejesus out of the audience, right? And hopefully I've kind of done that in a new way, and I've done my job on that. But the good news is there's stuff that you can do, stuff that your clients can do to control all those other damages, to cap them, to mitigate them, and to keep them from being as bad as they possibly could be. So I'm going to talk about some of the guidelines, some of the lessons learned, some of the advice that we give our clients at a top level to help them through some of these incidents. The first thing I'm going to mention is, here's 4 common buckets for information assurance for dealing around intrusion, right? And these should all be familiar to you. Before any of that happens, you need to prepare, you need to plan, you need to resource, you need to do your pen testing. You get that constant exercise of keeping your system as hardened as possible, your team as sharp as possible, using the best tools as possible. At some point, incidents happen. And then comes in the forensics. You detect it and you analyze. How bad was the damage? How deep did they get? How can we prevent this from happening again? How can we influence what happens when it happens again? And the third part is the forensics and the response. Is if something did get exfiltrated, where did it go? Who was involved? What must we do to keep any more from coming out, and how to stop the situation from getting any worse? And finally, the last bucket is post-incident recovery. How can we change our systems and our processes so that this does not happen this way again? We'd like to say how this doesn't happen again, but realistically, how can we keep this from happening this way again? 4 buckets, a lot of the efforts in cybersecurity falls in here. Well, the good news is we have the same 4 buckets, and we're talking about brand communications and repair. Planning, resourcing, and training. First off, this is just risk assessment. Thinking through your client, through your organization's greatest possible vulnerabilities when it comes to reputation. What could happen that could hurt us most? How should we respond? Let's think through this scenario. Let's create a plan so that we know how to deal with everything from who are our stakeholders, who are our investors, do we have to talk to our shareholders or to the stock, to Wall Street about this? Who's the media that's going to be interested? How do we bring in the attorneys? Is there federal agencies that need to be involved? What is our process, and what is our timeline, and what are our triggers to do all this? And once we have that plan, training people and testing people to make sure that they know how that plan works. It's a really great theory if you have a plan that's in place that's really solid, but then when the stuff happens, when the crap hits the fan, do you know what the president's secretary is going to say when the paper calls him? Do you know what anybody in the company is going to say when reporters get a hold of them by email or the phone? Is it going to be according to plan? Is it going to be some message that's going to throw things kind of under the bus and make things a lot more difficult? So that same level of pen testing can be done from communications. We call it live fire drills. The next one is monitoring. So just as you monitor for intrusion, for attempts on your system, you can monitor for things that are happening externally about your brand. You may discover things about your reputation, about people are saying, honestly, we've had clients where they learned about intrusion because somebody posted something to social media. Why did I Google this and find my personal information on the web? Why did I find I'm a company, and why did I find my vendor information posted someplace? Why was I contacted? So monitoring social media and the web can be not only a first warning system, but it can be a useful tool in the overall security process. When an event happens, there's of course mitigation and crisis response. How do you cap the damage? How do you get your executive team to huddle together and speak about the same messages and do what must be done to preserve the company as strongly as possible? And then finally, after all of the damage is done, what can you do to get people to trust you again? How do you improve people's belief and faith in your company and want to continue to do business with you. And not just your customers, but stock valuators and shareholders and anybody else in the public. Next, this example here is held up in the media as one of the top most successful headlines of all times, right? Because you just look at it. You want to read that, right? So the answer here is what makes news? You got to be sensitive to what makes news because you don't want to be news. This works, this headline works because it's unusual, it's different, it's titillating. So one of the things, the tools that we use is learning how to look at your situation and take all the interest value out of it. Not necessarily say, hey, it's just day to day, it's all routine here, but just, it's not special. It's something that doesn't really stand out. So there's really not much meat for a story here. Next, tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. Here's a couple of very high-profile individuals who are not known for the truth. Of all of the positive things that these people did during their presidencies, they are, among the public, known primarily for shading the truth. So the temptation frequently among leadership of a company going through an attack is to shade the truth. Look at what happened to BP. How much oil is coming out? Oh, there's some oil there, but don't worry about it. It's trickling. Well, okay, it's more than the trickle. It's a big trickle. But we've got it handled. It's capped. Well, we don't have it capped, and it's kind of gushing out there. But we have a plan. Well, we don't really have a plan, but we're going to clean it up. That trust framed BP's reputation for a long time. So the first thing that you have to do is remember that you have to be authentic because, of course, the internet doesn't forget. Next, prepare. I mentioned in that whole list back there the importance of being prepared for the high-risk scenarios. This is a little video clip I'm going to play. A number of my other partners love this for all crisis events because it really shows the importance of preparing. This is the story of Jackie Robinson, one of the first Major League Baseball players, African American. And he had a hard road that he fought to get into his position. And his team hired a black reporter to coach him on how to deal with all the attention he was going to get. And as you'll see, Jackie, because he was, very determined, said, "I don't need help. I don't need anybody's handout. I don't need to prepare. I'll handle it." But the reporter says, "Well, you may be wrong, and here's why." And this I'll let the clip do the rest of the explaining here, but it kind of shows that preparation can make the difference between being caught flat on your feet and knocked over in the media, or presenting the image of your company in the situation that you want to present. Oops, that didn't work right. Let's try that again. Oh, and you might not be able to hear this.
Your readers need to know how it feels. It's okay. That's not exactly a headline. It's all I got. Look, Jack, right now, it's just me asking you. But when you step out on that field, it's going to be the New York Times and the sporting news. You should think about it. If they ask something, I'll answer it. Okay, well, here's one for you. What if one of these white pitchers throws at you? Look, they're going to try to get under your skin. You need to be ready. Listen. You know how when you're at the plate, you want to see the ball come in slow? You want to see these questions come in slow, too.
Hey, Jackie, you think you can make it with these white boys?
I had no problems with white men in the service or at UCLA.
Yeah, what you gonna do if one of these pitchers throws through your head?
Yeah.
Yeah, Jack, yeah.
I'll duck.
So you guys hear that a little bit? Sorry, that wasn't really clear audio. But, I mean, it really makes the case that taking the time to think through your risk situations can prepare you for situations that you didn't even think about as well. So next we have another sports situation. One of my colleagues really is into sports, so we borrow some of his content. Very recently, Aaron Hernandez was arrested over the death, a killing of a friend in a nightclub. He was one of the players on the Patriots. And what we like to look at this is the Patriots had a very nicely handled response to the situation. You might say maybe they overreacted, maybe they didn't, but what's important here is the lesson of communicating sincerity and a very cautious and complete response. And I'll tell you, so there's really three things that you have to do. You have to take responsibility for the situation. You have to say you're doing everything in your power to address and to fix the situation, and then make the situation right for the people who are affected by it. So in this situation, the announcement that came out almost immediately, the same day, by the Patriots, was a statement that said, "A young man was murdered last week, and we extend our sympathies to the family and the friends who mourn his loss." So right away, they're being human. They're not being cold and callous. Words cannot express the disappointment we feel knowing that one of our players was arrested as a result of this investigation. They're not claiming that, they dropped the ball on screening or they weren't monitoring. They weren't necessarily even throwing him under the bus. He was arrested, and we're disappointed that he was arrested. We realize that law enforcement investigations in this matter are ongoing. We support their efforts and respect the process. What we're doing is separate from what the police are doing, and we're here to help. And at this time, we believe this transaction is simply the right thing to do, and that was when they were separating them. They took him off the roll. They took him off the team. Okay? So this is just an example of a team that had a good process in place, that were able to respond quickly before social media got a hold of it and started asking questions of, is this the Patriots' fault? Could they have done more? Were there signs in the locker room that they could have seen this coming? All right, did they handle it responsibly? They headed all of that off. Next, decision paralysis. Frequently, we work with executives who are encountering a big, scary situation. They have just been pushed off a cliff for their organization, and they're seeing all the damage that can happen, and they do nothing. They don't know what the whole situation is yet, so they do nothing. Or they talk to their attorneys, and believe me, we always work with attorneys. You should always listen to your attorney's advice. But I'll tell you something about attorneys in an exfiltration or a data intrusion incident. They will always believe that you can't get sued by anything you did not do. So their number one concern is to not get you further sued. Now, if you remember those 4 different levels of damage, that's not their concern. They don't care if it causes you another $1.5 billion of damages. They're just concerned with keeping you out of the court as much as possible. So lawyers, it's not their job to look at the big picture for your organization. So part of our toolkit that we bring to our clients is how to break the executive leadership out of decision paralysis. This example right here is Colonel John Boyd, a Korean War ace. He was one of I believe the Navy's, U.S. Air Force's top pilot instructors, dogfight instructors for decades. And he developed a system called OODA. He used this system, observe, orient, decide, and act. He was also known as 42nd Boyd because he would prove over and over that in 40 seconds in a dogfight situation, he could go from a position of disadvantage to being on top and in control. OODA and tools like this are what we bring to management so that they don't feel they've got to solve the entire situation, that they have to have all the information. But they can solve what's right in front of them right now to convert the most pressing situation into a situation of disadvantage into advantage, and repeat and repeat and repeat. So executive leadership skills and management are very, very critical in crisis situations. Yeah, time for a little bit of a chuckle, right? And of course, what we also see leadership often doing is, it's not our fault. Blame somebody else. We can blame a vendor. We can blame anybody else, blame somebody else in the organization, blame another division, blame law enforcement. This also doesn't work because people believe that if it happened on your watch, it was your responsibility on some level. So the blame game never works in a crisis communication situation. You must take at least the level of responsibility of saying it happened on our watch and we're going to fix it. And then finally, as you guys are all aware, when the event has just started, okay, first off, how many people here have been involved in a data intrusion incident where you were involved right in the midst of it, trying to do the forensic, figure out what happened, what was the nature of the event? Please raise your hands. I just want to see how many people here were in the front line. Okay, about half the people here. So then I'm going to speak specifically to you. How quickly did you know the whole situation? Not very quickly, right? Might have been in the course of days. It might have been the course of weeks before you knew everything that happened. It goes back to that data paralysis, that decision paralysis situation I mentioned earlier. Very often the executive leadership is, I don't want to say anything until I know everything. Well, guess what? You can't wait that long. So there is a balance between not saying anything and being called for something's going on. You could have done something earlier. You could have told us something earlier. Or telling too much. Everybody's also afraid of saying, well, how much is too much to reveal of what we know right now? Maybe it isn't the whole situation. Maybe it's not as bad as we fear. There is no simple recipe for how much is the right amount to reveal. That takes a little bit of experience and practice, which is why we do what we do. But know that there is a fine line, there is a proper balance between not saying enough that causes damage and saying too much about your situation, which opens yourself up to more risk and more liability. So now I'm just going to kind of wrap up with just a few little, reminders and checklists. So one thing to do is, of course, the 4 buckets. Start off with planning, preparation. Walk yourself, your client, through the scenarios that are going to possibly be the greatest potential risk and damage to you. Think what you might do in that situation. Make a plan around it and assign responsibilities and test and practice live fire drills as if they actually happen. Act quickly. Don't try to solve the whole situation. Don't wait until all the information is available. Make small decisions and communication that turn disadvantage into small advantage, and repeat and repeat and repeat. Take responsibility. Don't duck it. No matter whether or not it was your fault, if it happened with your organization, you have some responsibility to your customers, to your partners, to your stakeholders, to your staff, to your shareholders. And finally, you have to be honest and authentic. Pretending the situation isn't as bad as it is, hoping that you can conceal the worst of the damage and nobody ever really has to know, we've yet to see that turn out in a positive way. Don't hide in the sand and hope it blows over. They rarely do. Don't speculate. This is important when you're talking to media. Media would love to get you to speculate. Well, do you think it could be as bad as this? Could it? How many possible people could it affect? Just do not speculate. Don't ignore your attorneys. They know their business. They are a very, very important part of the mix, especially state by state. There are different laws. There are federal laws that may apply in any given situation. Don't duck responsibility, just the flip side of what I said before. And don't ignore your customers and stakeholders. There's a lot of people that care about what happens when an intrusion event happens or data theft happens. Make sure that you find a way to reach out to all the people who might care about this and find a positive way to demonstrate to them that you care, you're taking measures, you're trying to help in those situations. So that wraps up my overall presentation. Just kind of give you a little bit of a taste of the potential damage that comes out of hacking events beyond the actual hacking, and some of the things that you can do about it. In my role, I handle all levels from advising executive leadership to actually working with the regulators, federal agencies, and the information assurance team. So I get to span all sides of the equation. So if anybody has any questions, we still have 15 minutes to lunch, so that means we've got 5 minutes before everybody wants to bail and go eat, but please ask me questions. Yes? So I think there's two ways that I can answer your question. One, I'm going to take it as close as I can. So thinking about is part of your risk assessment, who is most likely to attack you, right? If I can summarize. Yeah. So I mean, if you're a medium-sized bank, it's less likely to be the Chinese government, right? More likely to be a cyber gang who is going to target you for a certain type of attack. Then as a security specialist, you can say, for banks of your size, here are the trends that we're seeing this year. We're seeing typically there's going to be a $1 to $6 million transaction. It's going to follow these most like sequences. It might happen through smishing as opposed to a spear phishing attack. But here's what we think you should be thinking about these 3 months. Absolutely. We do that with our clients, and some of the IT vendors that we work with frequently do the very same practice. But on the other side is, do you have anybody doing white hat efforts to kind of do the spear phishing, to do the behavioral engineering? Is there anybody who's kind of working with inside knowledge from human resources to say, hey, let's pretend that I'm the bad guy and I'm in the system and I have access to your database. What do we have that might be damaging? How could that be used? And then kind of run through some of that. We haven't had the opportunity to do that, but we have done some live drills where we work with the client to say, hey, what type of information could we pretend we have? So there's two sides, and that's a great question, and that would be great preparation. Yes. The short answer is they all stink. The bigger they are, the less prepared they are. I find chemical and power sectors tend to be, since they're a little bit more closely under the lens of Homeland Security, tend to be a little tighter on that. Any company that, chemical or manufacturing that can have something that explodes or poison the environment, they usually pay pretty close attention because they're thinking in terms of terrorists. And they realize that they have a higher level of threat. But other than that, every other sector is pretty bad. But I'd say what I see as the two greatest areas of greatest weakness are small businesses, less than 25 employees. Because we're reaching an inflection point. As I mentioned before, every car wash, every restaurant is now processing credit cards. They're now keeping online databases of their customers. And it's one thing if it's a software as a service or they're using a very high level vendor to handle that for them. But even if it's just a database, that database can be ransomed and shut the business down. We're seeing it particularly when it comes to small physicians' practices. I think that's a huge threat that's coming up. Doctors don't even want to deal with this. It's just a headache, and they have so many legacy systems. Even if they're on some of the new HIPAA-compliant systems that are sort of shaking out, They still have all their legacy systems there. They still have all their hard copies because they don't want to learn the new systems themselves. So I'd say the greatest vulnerabilities are the small businesses that aren't even thinking about it, but whose entire business could go up in smoke if their entire customer database is hijacked. Yeah. So we work with vendors when it comes to really all levels of the situation where it's, planning and preparation. If the vendors have to be part of the plan, they need to be informed. They need to be part of the live fire drills. Work with them through the mitigation situation because their messaging has to be in sync with your messaging. And of course, we work with them for the reputation repair. But when it actually comes to selecting and setting up the relationship, that's not something that we generally get involved with. Just the same as, when we work with our clients, frequently they have a sophisticated IT department, and they probably have an information assurance vendor. Sometimes we're asked to recommend one where to be brought in, but 9 times out of 10, they already have somebody, and we work with them. And that's kind of how the situation works. The shortest answer I have for you is there are a couple specialists out there that specialize in the IT security ramifications of the vendor relationship, vendor management for IT security. And they cover everything from the protocols, the interfaces, the behaviors, and the contracts and insurance. And all we can do is say, make sure you find somebody who knows all of those details because they change quickly and they change state by state. It's definitely a specialized field. Yes?
So, going back to one of your earlier slides, you had the pipeline from fishing to spearfishing to transaction. With that, have you seen where the attacks, as they were being mitigated, eventually die off? So to frame the question, so we've been experiencing phishing for a while, and we've got a really good grasp on education on the employees that are so decentralized, especially difficult. It moved to spearfishing, and then it moved to intercepting transactions. We've been watching it, we've been catching it, we actually stopped transactions from going. We haven't seen this smoke screen yet, but we've been stopping it ahead of time. We're ahead of them. We pick up on the compromises very quickly, but it's not dying out. It's still consistent, and nobody's doing anything about it. So we've met with the Bureau, and they were doing some stuff, but it's continuing to go on. Does it ever die off?
So there is no real statistics on this out there. My gut feeling, talking to some federal people and talking to a number of our clients, is as long as you're a fat fish in the pond, that you have the criteria for making a great, sufficiently large transaction, they're not going to let you go. Even if you were the victim and you went all the way through this, you should expect that they're going to come nibbling back in a year and a half when you're recovered. So I don't think that given the size of the situation overseas, they're ever going to look at your client and say, wow, he is just too tough. They may never allocate a full team. Anecdotally, from some of the people, I have plenty of friends in special ops. I'm sure you guys do too, and we have you hear lots of stories. But supposedly, when you're moving between fishing and spearfishing, You have 1 or 2 people that are running that bot network to see if the phishing works. And then you have some sort of management team that says, what's the size of the opportunity here? And they do a cost-benefit analysis that says, in order to go for, let's say, a $10 million transaction or a $20 million transaction, we can afford to allocate 30 people for 3 weeks. And if 1 out of 3 of these work or 1 out of 6 of these work, we're going to easily be making our growth quota. I mean, they're actually thinking on those levels right now. So yes, you can change the equation, but I don't know that that puts you on a list that finally says, you know, at some point they're going to keep from allocating the expensive resources on you until you show some vulnerability. But I doubt they'll go away. Yes. So that falls right into that spectrum that I mentioned of how much is too much and how much is too little. There's not a straightforward answer to it. Given the little bit of information that you've said, I would, of course, patch and prepare. I would do a risk exercise with your team, imagining what's the worst it could be, and then assigning some probabilities. I would assign some research to go out and hit the internet and do all the forensics you can to look at the possibility that was out. And I would prepare all the messaging as if it's the worst. And honestly, you might want to sit a little tight and just be prepared. In the meantime, you take that as an opportunity to build some equity. If the fire isn't burning yet, what a great time. And I don't know which industry you're talking about for your particular situation. You don't have to tell. Public sector? Public sector, depending on, if you're doing social services or something, just for example, maybe that's a great time to reach out to your database of citizens that you interact with or that use your services and say, how to protect your identity. Here's best practices. We're working hard to, have the best systems in place. And start getting the message out right now that you care for their privacy, you care for their information. This is what you're doing right now to keep things in control. And if you do have to cross that bridge, hopefully people already are seeing that you have been working hard and this somehow got past it anyway, as opposed to you fell asleep at the wheel. So that's just, without knowing any deeper answer, risk analysis, do some scenarios, see what you can do to build some equity, and hold on tight. Are we kind of wrapping up? One last question? Okay, so you can reach me. I'll put my last slide up there. So for my contact information, I will be around for a little bit. Please come visit. Please ask questions. And happy to meet all of you. Thanks for joining me this morning. Enjoy your lunch.